I'm Tom Johnson, Thomas Johnson Antique Furniture Restoration in Gorham, Maine. This is a little different project. This is a slab of wood. It's made up of reclaimed lumber from an old mill in New Hampshire. A woodworker here in Gorham, Tim Hill, had a load of this stuff. He's doing a lot of different projects with it. He was kind enough to glue up these boards. There's 5 boards here, and cut them, mill it and cut them to the size that I needed. It's going to be an island top in my kitchen. This wood has got a lot of defects in it, and I've got to repair all those defects, do the edge, sand it up, and I'm going to finish it with the Waterlox tung oil varnish. This is the top surface, and it's got some wood chipping up here and here, kind of flaking up all along this big crack. There's a huge crack here, but the boards seem quite stable. And then, knots and defects. Here's another one. Bolt holes, nail holes. The bottom is a lot worse than the top. Tim Hill did a good job of picking the boards and matching them. I really only have to worry about the defects along the bottom edge though. So I'm going to, this is the top surface, I'm going to flip it over and start with the bottom. This thing is amazingly heavy and dense. So I'm going to go around and identify each defect that I want to use epoxy on. Because once I mix up the epoxy, I'll need to do quite a few of them at the same time. Holes like this go all the way through, so I got to be sure to tape the other side of the hole. I've got my West System epoxy, some alcohol for cleanup with some paper towels, Dixie cup, syringe. Okay, all right, let's see what we got. Yeah, that's nice and solid now. Well, this is working by hand, but I think I'll use the power sander. Now, you'll never see me use an orbital sander on a piece of furniture, but that doesn't mean I don't have them and use them. It's going to be loud. One thing I've learned here is that when I fill the defects on the top, I can't just let the epoxy, I can't do it sloppily. The epoxy soaks into the wood and it's too hard to sand away. Luckily this is the bottom, it won't matter, but I've got to come up with a different technique on the top. You can see here on the top where I've taped, to keep the epoxy from running through from the other side. I'm going to have a little bit of a problem there, so I've got to sand that away, maybe scrape it too. I'm going to use hide glue to glue down these loose bits instead of epoxy, because the epoxy spreads too much. Okay, let's see what we've got here. All those loose bits are down now. Of course, if you remember, on the underside of the top, when I filled all these defects with clear epoxy, the epoxy spilled out over the edge, it seeped into the surrounding wood, and I was unable to sand it off because it seeped in so deeply. So I've got to figure out a way to seal off the wood so that the epoxy won't seep in. This was a hole all the way through the top, so I taped this, filled it from the other side, and this is the epoxy that seeped around it. I'll have to sand this off one way or another. This may not have penetrated as deeply. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this top 2 coats of shellac today, and then tomorrow I'll fill in all the defects with clear epoxy. I realized that before I give it a coat of shellac, I just want to go over just a bit with 100 grit paper. Alright, this is dried overnight. Looks good. Now I can start filling in all these defects. Okay, this is dried overnight. It feels great. Now I need to figure out the best way to take this down. I could try chiseling it down. A card scraper might work. All right, well, let's try a sander. It's going to be noisy. So I think I'm going to go with the sander. In fact, it'll end up being a combination of the sander and the card scraper. So as you can see, there's still quite a few places I have to put more epoxy in. Some of these holes were endless, but now they seem to have bottomed out at a good place. Others might have been bubbles coming up. So I've got hopefully just one more syringe of West System epoxy and everything will be filled. The epoxy I put in yesterday dried overnight. I sanded it with the Random Orbit sander, scraped it. Now I'm going to sand it with a straight line sander, and then I'm going to use a router to just round over the edges. Okay, finally, ready for the first coat of finish. And I'm going to use Waterlox tung oil varnish. All right, this is dried overnight. It dried great. I'm just going to apply another coat. I don't have to sand between coats. Luckily with this Waterlox finish, you don't have to sand between coats. I usually do for aesthetic reasons, but it's nice when it's soaked in so much, I don't have to do anything but just brush on another coat. A lot of people think of these as single-use brushes, but I'll be able to use just this one for this entire job. Well, this just keeps looking better and better with each coat. It's going to need probably 2 more coats. But what I'm going to do today is flip it over and get some finish on the bottom. So Off camera, I put altogether 3 coats on the bottom of the island top. I sanded between the second and third coats. I just put the third coat on first thing this morning. It's dry enough now that I can flip it over onto those points and get a third coat on the top. I'm going to sand with 220 free cut gold. So this top surface has 2 coats on it. I'm giving it a really good sanding with 220. Even down to the bare wood in a couple places, especially along the edge where I had those drips I was cutting off. I've got to be more careful about those drips on these coats. But I'm really getting it down, looking for any problem areas, and then I'll put the third coat of the same sheen on it. I'm trying to sand enough to get rid of all the little shiny spots down in the grain. In other words, I want to get the really fine grain, all the grain, really sealed in well, because this top is going to have hard use in the kitchen. But I don't want a real thick finish on top. Okay, now I'm going to wipe it down with Mohawk Wax Wash Remover. I'm not anticipating any problems with contaminants. I've been wearing gloves and stuff, but I find that this just really helps produce a really nice final coat. There's still a few spots, especially around these knots, where there's some open grain, so I'm going to try dabbing a little finish in those spots. See if maybe they'll fill in now. All right, this is dried overnight, actually almost 24 hours, and it looks really good, but it definitely needs another coat. There's 2 areas with this kind of grain where I hope you can see here, it continues to really soak it up. And there are areas like this that still look a little grainy and a little starved for finish. Of course, I have really sanded it well with 220. I mean, even going through to the bare wood in a couple places. So today I'll go over it with 500 grit paper and then the Scotch-Brite pad, just lightly. And I'm going to use the 500 free cut gold. This sanding with 500 is really quick and easy. I'm just smoothing it, cutting the grain a little bit. I definitely don't want to go through the edges anymore. Okay, now I'll go over it with the Scotch-Brite pad. Once again, just lightly, just kind of evening it up, going after a few spots that I didn't want to sand too hard, too aggressively. Now I'll wipe it off again with the Mohawk Wax Wash Remover. I'm hoping this is the final coat, and so I'm going to use satin. This looks really good. The satin sheen is just right. Feels really smooth too. Not many nits or anything. Must have had a pretty dustless, relatively dustless situation here. And the areas that I thought looked a little starved all look fine now. Filling all these huge defects with clear epoxy has worked out really well. You can actually see down to the bottom of the defect there. I think all I need to do with this top is go over it with a craft paper, which is a piece of paper from a brown paper shopping bag. Well, there you have it. I think this is going to be a great top for our kitchen island. This is made out of reclaimed lumber from an old mill in New Hampshire. This wood was used in the mill probably 150 years ago. Probably came from old growth lumber. It's a lot of work using distressed wood. I love how these big defects, you can see right down into them, and I think it looks pretty good. This big nail hole you can see all the way through to the floor. I'll hold a flashlight underneath of it. I've got 20 hours in this job. I used the router, the pneumatic sanders, and these tools and materials. If you like this video, please hit like, subscribe. Feel free to share it on any other platforms. I'd appreciate it.